Okay, so today is our academic libraries meeting to discuss, share ideas about how we're faring and what we imagine our next steps in future will be in dealing with COVID-19. My name is Jeff Bruner. I'm joined here by my colleague from Will's, Melissa McClymans, and I'm thrilled to be handing the facilitation duties off to Matt Cohn from Madison College, who's going to kick off our conversation. Matt, over to you.
Thank you, sir. All right, so I just want to say I don't claim any special knowledge about really anything COVID related, but the reason Jeff and Melissa asked me if I would be willing to facilitate is because I brought an idea to them that Will's would be a good organization to host an open forum about this. So I'm not going to say much, hopefully. I will just begin with a question, and that is, what is highest on your list of concerns when it comes to the idea of reopening, whatever that might look like at your particular campus? And I'm going to mute myself and see who has some ideas.
I can start. I think one of the big things that I'm concerned about at my campus, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm Nathan Dowd. I'm the library director at Edgewood College. Is starting back in the fall with students both in residence on our campus and possibly also taking face-to-face courses, to not be able to meet all of their needs in the physical library while still providing a safe environment for both students, faculty, and library staff in that way. My library is going to have staff return to the building on a very, very limited basis next week for the first time. But we may, or at least that's the plan, but we've had such a significant difficulty in obtaining enough cleaning and sanitizing supplies that we may actually have to delay that a week. And similarly, we want to start a drive up, no contact pickup service, but we've had trouble getting hold of the supplies we need to do that. So that's kind of first on my mind this right as well today.
Next, I'm Caitlin. Well, while I'm talking, I can probably do video. Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm the Information Services Manager at Viterbo University Library, and so I'm in charge of the front desk area. And our architecture is really not set up for this. So one of my main concerns is staff safety. We've got 2 staff members' desks that are literally right next to each other. So I don't quite know how to enforce social distancing to patrons, because asking them to do it on their own is one thing, but of course we all know that that only goes so far, and I don't know if we're going to have any teeth to be able to say please do this or else. The other thing that I'm concerned about is that who we're going to be expected to do more physically, like we have to monitor our space more, and we're going to have to clean more. And some of that has already been taken by physical plant. They've said we're going to do X, Y, Z, but that still leaves like copiers, printers, workstations, and we're going into a possibly pinched budget next year. And so we're going to have to spend more on cleaning supplies. Physical plant's only going to do so much. They only can do so much. Only so many people, only so many resources. So I'm a little worried we're going to run out of cleaning supplies, gloves, things like that. A lot of people have been working on cloth masks, so I'm not so worried about that. But when it comes to like wipes and sanitation and hand sanitizers and all of that, I'm worried we're going to do our part and that's going to come up short.
Anyone else? So if you just joined us, we're talking about what's highest on your list of concerns. And so far we've heard lack of cleaning supplies, difficulty with coordinating cleaning efforts with existing cleaning crews, and then the idea of our physical setups, which are not necessarily conducive to best practices when it comes to physical distancing of people. Anybody else want to talk about what's highest on their list of concerns?
So a concern that I have, I'm Anne from UWO Fox Cities Library. I'm currently the only staff person that's not on continuous furlough, so planning for the fall is really difficult. UWO-wide, there's a lot of people working, but I'm the only person for my campus currently, and we know we're not going to be allowed back on campus until sometime in August. So planning for the fall and not knowing what it's going to look like is a little, that's concerning for me because I'm not sure even what that's going to look like. And my colleagues that I'd be able to bounce off ideas that are really intimately involved with what our space looks like and what our students are, won't be back to work until basically a few days before classes start. So that's a tough spot to be in as well. And I know a lot of my UW system colleagues are in this same sort of boat with a lot of staff on furloughs, whether continuous or intermittent. It does put a strain on the ability to sort of come up with contingency plans for the fall, whether we're face-to-face or online or some sort of combination.
We had a couple of chats online for, and it's somewhat related to what Ann just said in terms of like planning how you're going to work in a space. A couple of people have mentioned how to staff safely. Did anybody want to speak to that? There's the idea of things like skeleton crews, certain rotations during the day. One of the staff things I think most of us probably have to think about, of course, is student staff and the complications that brings. But does anybody want to talk specifically about staffing?
I'll jump in. My name's Kate at North Central Technical College. We are going to, as a campus, require staff and students to be masked. We also will be requiring the 6-foot social distancing. Our facilities department has been working on removing chairs and getting stickers and signage so that there really will only be places for patrons to sit that will be 6 feet apart. For staff, we'll be working on kind of a similar concept. Fortunately, we do have some staff offices where people can sit in their cubes and be socially distant, but we will only have one person out at our front desk just because the spacing between the front desk stations would not be 6 feet apart. So we'll have rotation of staff, excuse me. We're going to aim for more like a 50% staff on campus at a particular time to help manage that, and that includes student staffing as well. So hopefully with those measures in place, we can, achieve an ideal safe situation for everybody. Oh, and I wanted to also mention, we're working on a kind of clean in, clean out standard process as well, so that when you leave a workstation, whether you're a student, whether you're a staff person, you wipe down and sanitize the workstation when you leave, and the new person coming in sanitizes it before they sit down as well. And we will have gloves in place for any type of material handling. Our patrons will not be allowed to browse collections. They will need to request an item, and our staff person who is gloved and masked will go and retrieve that item for them. And then we will have bins that things are returned into, so that our library staff does not touch it until the appropriate time period has passed that's been isolated.
I guess as Katie's campus is a little ahead of a lot of our campuses, but anybody else on staffing or any, if you don't want to talk about that, we could talk about other list of concerns.
This is Bradwell Richards from the Shelter House Library. We're a small residential seminary outside Milwaukee. Maybe 30 students on campus who live here as well, and another 10 faculty who live on campus. And usually our students have 24-hour access to the library. So we'll open 9 to 4 for reference and whatever, but they come and go typically as they want all evening and weekend. And obviously we've had to change that. And one of the things will be is if we keep the building locked down in the evenings and weekend, how are we going to find money to staff it at a basic level? Are we going to close the stacks or not? Are we going to take away study carrels? Because they all have a study carrel that's like a foot from the next study carrel, which is obviously an issue. So although we're very small, we have some of the same logistical things. But one of the things I'm also wondering about is interlibrary loan, because we send out 500 or 600 books a year via interlibrary loan. We're very much a net lender. And we're just trying to work out how much we have to quarantine stuff when it comes back, and how are people disinfecting books. And then, yeah, so the fall is going to look very, very different from us if we don't have 24-hour service for the patrons.
Bramwell, I just wanted to mention another thing that came up in chat that I think is similar, and I've seen mentioned on a few different email lists as well, is reserves and short-term loans. These books that are like in and out of people's hands all day. That's another issue that's outside of the normal circulation process. And that can be a concern too, of how to manage that, which is often very critical for some campuses to have those materials.
And that's a good point, because our reserve collection is available to students 24/7 on an honor system. It's just on a shelf in reference. Use all the books on reserve and sign them out for 2 hours and bring them back. But so we're going to have to reconsider how we do course reserves, because not a lot of students don't want to buy all the books. That's probably similar for all of you, because they do get expensive. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I'll have to think about that.
As Katie Aldrich said on the chat, this is Catherine Johnson from Fox Valley Tech. I was on a ALA webinar, live meeting yesterday, and they were saying that they're actually doing some experiments to see how long the virus can last on different kinds of library materials, like DVD cases, plasticized covers versus paper, hardback versus paperback. Because right now they're saying, well, anywhere between 24 and 72 hours, but no one really knows yet. And whether the plastic covers are different than having a paper cover or hardback. And so right now we're kind of in the dark on what is safe. We have a slightly different situation than some other places, because our library is completely open. It's anyone who gets in the building can walk through our stacks. So there's no way we can say we have closed stacks or we'll only be doing delivery, because we do not have any control on anyone who walks through our library as long as the building is open. And our entire checkout is on the honor system. So as long as the building is open, anyone can walk through the library.
Yeah, I just want to speak to the surfaces thing. I see Anne asked about surfaces because, and I would agree, what I've read with Catherine, that is really we don't know, but the CDC did say, I think they made some changes on their recommendations on their website that said surfaces are not a primary means of transmission of the virus. That doesn't mean, again, those surfaces are necessarily safe. And we're kind of in the dark about what those new tweaked guidelines actually mean. And so, yeah, surfaces in our business, it's really complicated. And I think it's especially complicated, like you said, with reserve materials. And returns and quarantine, and most of us are very limited on space as it is, and so to think that we could put aside all materials for 72 hours doesn't seem particularly realistic. So
one of the things at my campus that we kind of talked about related to that too is we had the same kind of issue with the mail and with journals incoming and things like that we don't have any way of knowing how much handling they've had before they get to us and things. And so at least at my campus, we decided not to quarantine books when they came back in. We're going to be wearing gloves when we handle them, but we're not going to be limiting reserves or access to materials in that way. I think we are a little more worried about the people contact, and so that's kind of how we're handling it. But it's been, like a lot of people have said, I agree completely. It's been really hard to make that kind of decision with the information that's available and how much it varies.
okay, so the next question I kind of had on my list of, in case nobody was saying anything, was about staffing. I think we've touched on staffing already. A couple of other ideas that popped up into my head. Maybe you have some ideas beyond these, but first of all, staffing areas. Again, we're limited in some libraries of how much you can space out. But in terms of when we're not engaged in public services, are there some ways that we can distance ourselves from one another? I was thinking about when we got back to work, we often eat lunch together, but that's probably not going to happen very soon. Zones of service in the library, we kind of have, in many libraries, we have areas where we typically have reference services or computer help services, but might those change? So does anybody want to speak to anything about sort of logistical organization of public services, especially since that's maybe the hardest part about this? I guess that's no.
I guess I'll jump in. I mean, like quite a few other libraries, we're going to have shorter staff. In our case, we have a retirement, and that person is not going to be that person is not going to be replaced during this emergency, or maybe ever. And especially if we're not allowed to hire student workers, if we do reopen, and right now we're not sure when we are reopening, it may not be till December or January at this point, but we will not have enough physical bodies to cover the hours if we have the same open schedule that we had before. We just won't have enough hours in the day. And so we'll either have to rethink services and just say that we only will have limited times, especially since some of our staff may not feel comfortable or have health issues that may not allow them to work with the public. I mean, they might have valid ADA requests that they work remotely while the COVID-19 is going through the population. So we'll really have to think through hours, when there'll be people available, our use of work study students, and this whole idea that we're available all the time for students, that just may not, it'll be a new shift of thinking for us as librarians, that we will not be able to provide all the services that we used to.
Just to clarify, Catherine, did you say that you are not going to be hiring students, or that that was a recommendation?
We don't know if we're going to be allowed to or not. We simply don't know. We have not, we requested some students and we don't know whether we'll get them. It's, you know, I think that administrations are kind of also going on the fly, and, but we're also not allowed to have work study students without one of us physically in the building or physically in the area. And if only one of us is salaried and we have one in, you know, and the others are have limited hours that they're allowed to work, we just won't have enough bodies to cover all the times we used to have. We just won't. And if any of us get sick, and even if it's not even COVID, even if it's just, you know, the regular flu, or, you know, or one of us breaks a foot and can't go to work, we may have to really rethink service hours. And I'm sure we're not the same people. At least on the chat, it looks like lots of people are saying that.
I think you've raised a valid point about student workers. Our students have work crew duties where they, one afternoon a week, they clean the buildings on campus and do all that kind of work. So I don't know if we're going to have them back or not, and what does that mean for the library staff in terms of, do we have to pick that up? Or the other thing I'm thinking from a staffing point of view, I can't imagine how I'm going to do bibliographic instruction one-on-one 6 feet away. If I have to show somebody how to use a database, that's just not realistic. So I think a lot of the 6 foot away is what we should be doing, but realistically, I'm going to be sitting next to somebody at a computer, both masked, and showing them how to do things. So I think there's going to be some reality, and there's going to be some in a perfect world situations, especially with bibliographic instruction.
Yeah, as an instruction librarian, I was going to ask about instruction ideas. And I'm not sure everybody's the daredevil that Bramwell is. Anybody else want to say anything about staffing before we move on to another issue? And again, if you have another issue, please just
you might want to check the chat.
Yeah, Jeff, you got any good chat ideas?
No, I mean, we've been discussing it in chat.
Oh, okay. I get you.
Yeah, there's actually fairly robust chat going on right now on our chiming in, taking up on a lot of the topics that we've talked about. There's a lot of questions, you know, there have been questions about, are other libraries already contemplating reduced hours? That's a topic that we've heard from a couple of folks via the voice chat as well. I saw an interesting thing pop up in chat about ordering some laser pointers to try and help with database instruction, you know, at least maybe being able to like point out where to click using that. I don't know. I mean, that could maybe get you 6 feet away from somebody rather than side by side at the desk with them. Let me see here. I can't imagine how we protect the CERC person, student, or staff. Our circulation desk is very open. Plexiglass barrier wouldn't really help to protect the worker or the customer. I think that's another question that I think gets back to a theme that is certainly emerging here, is that all of our libraries are so different, both in what we offer and how we offer it, and the physical spaces. What works well for one person on the call might not be workable at all for somebody else. I would be interested to know if any of the resources that your campuses might be using for distance ed can be leveraged for some of the work that you're doing in the library. Can you do some of your BI instruction is redundant, of course, BI, using some of the distance ed tools that faculty may be using to teach courses? Has anyone got creative ideas around how that might work?
Jeff, we've been using that pretty extensively for a while at Edgewood, primarily because our largest two graduate programs are completely online, and that's our Doctorate of Education and Doctorate of Nursing Practice. And so we've done a lot of instruction over the last couple of years, and significantly so this past semester, using Cisco's WebEx. We're also using Microsoft Teams, and then for asynchronous work, we've been using Screencast-O-Matic and making web tutorials and things like that. And those have been working out fairly well. We can use them for a one-on-one reference as well as for instruction in that way.
I'm sure we're not the only ones, but we finally got chat installed, and we're really hoping to expand that. And we've been also using any teleconferencing that we have available, which includes Collaborate through Blackboard. We've been doing Teams. We've been occasionally doing FaceTime if that's all they have. Just meeting the students with whatever technology works for them. And I can see that on the chat, people are using Canvas and face-to-face and Zoom and Blackboard Collaborate, so it looks like we're not the only ones.
Another topic that Val mentioned in chat is the issue of students that may be depending on the library for any access to computers or Wi-Fi. I'm sure that might not only be students, but that's probably a big issue on a lot of campuses, that they don't have their own equipment or network access outside of the building. So that's can be another issue with reduced hours or reduced availability of the building. Is anyone taking any of that into account as well in your calculations about what to do going forward?
I think the frustrating part about the technology piece there is that it's not up to us. Like what is allowed to be open and the hours we're allowed to be there, or if we're willing to be there, is all up to way higher up the food chain. Like the chancellor's cabinet is making those decisions for us. I'm not even allowed to go into campus to get anything for people. So that's been a real struggle. I know we have people who've been sitting in our parking lot to access Wi-Fi. So it's a real issue. And if this goes into fall, I think enrollment's going to be a big concern, because I know there were a lot of students who basically the last time they engaged in their course was before we went alternative. So that's going to be a real struggle. This alternative delivery is not the same as truly online classes, which may be better in the fall, but we still have students that didn't sign up for that, and they don't want that. They want to be face-to-face. Online learning is rough if that's not what you signed up for.
I'll just say though too, for those of us that are public institutions, I got on chat someone this week who needed to finish his taxes and his computer was broken. So he wanted to come use our computers. And in public institutions, we don't card at the front door. So it won't just be students who come in and want to use our computers. Unless we lock them down so that you have to have an ID, it's going to be members of the public too, who we will have less control over, you might, I mean, control, you know, about enforcement of masks than we might if they were our own students.
We just were discussing similar problems. We have students on campus right now at NWTC. I have library staff on campus doing the laptop pickup and drop-offs, and now we're doing book pickups. We were talking about how to keep students only in the building where they're taking classes. So they're going to be requiring students to wear an ID badge that everyone can see, and it's going to be color coded. So it's easy for people to see if somebody's out of the building that they're allowed to be in. We have been told that students will not be in the library for fall. They will not be in the commons areas, cafeteria, anything like that for fall at this point.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the other extreme is going to happen. I saw a friend on Facebook posted an article about all the anger that's been directed at library staff. This was particularly for public librarians, but I can easily anticipate when we say make a policy that says we require people to have a mask when they walk in our library doors, or in the case of Catherine or others, they walk on the campus. The question is, I mean, color-coded badges, masks, whatever, who's going to enforce that? And, you know, how rigorously is it going to be enforced? What recourse do we have if students decide to ignore it or they go off on us? So I think both sides of the administrative playbook can be unnerving. They could either be too lax or they could be too restrictive.
Yeah, I think the enforcement end of the policies is going to be tough for all of us. I know I had a conversation with some contractors we have doing some HVAC work in the building, and I told them they would have to respect our wishes to wear masks when they were in the building, and they weren't too happy about that. And I told them they could leave and talk to the facilities manager if they didn't agree with that, but she was able to talk them through that and things. But I think those kinds of things are gonna keep coming up. In terms of access for students, another thing that I worry about, and this is for publics as well too, is as some agreements that the different vendors have provided us with a little more flexibility, either in terms of free resources or, you know, even at my campus, we had a certain number of seats for WebEx that we were really only using it with staff and faculty had their own accounts, but we were able to get access for everyone. As this kind of goes into the fall, will those things kind of dry up and we'll have less resources than we do right now? So that's another kind of worry and thought I have too. Actually, come to think about it, that might be a good question for Jeff. Jeff, do you hear anything from vendors and things like that about what their plans are on some of those special agreements or alternative access that they've been giving us up to this point, either continuing or sundowning?
A lot of the things that we have gotten extensions or free resources did have or do have kind of end dates attached to them. A lot of those were set earlier on, right? So I'm not sure, and I think it's probably worth going back to the ones that we've seen. And a lot of the things that we've been sharing are not necessarily will specific. It's more like, here this vendor is saying this stuff is free for this amount of time, or number of users is going to be, unlimited for this amount of time. But I think it's probably worth going back and saying, okay, well, we're still in it. So what do you want to do? How do you want to proceed? I think a lot of people were maybe overly optimistic, but that by the end of May, things will be back to normal, so we can just start going back to business as usual. That's clearly not the case. I too am concerned about the ability for libraries to even afford the resources that they need, even under normal circumstances. That was already a concern, right? I mean, we've had there's a library that's absent from this call, not because they couldn't make it, but because the whole college closed 3 weeks ago. Holy Family College in Manitowoc is gone. So that's a thing that I think I'm afraid we're going to see some more of that too. That's a little dire, I guess, but it's a reality about the attendant economic problems that are coming along with the immediate health problems or public health concerns that we're dealing with.
And speaking of expiration dates, Valerie just did share something on chat, at least from UW Libraries, with some information about that. I don't know to whom it applies beyond the UW, but that could help answer some of those questions. Let me see if anybody's interested in talking about this. When I was thinking about the lunch thing, when I was thinking about if we're going to have skeleton crews or distance workstations at work, how do you think this is going to affect employee interactions and employee relations to have people physically absent from each other or distance? I mean, we have some idea of that from working from home, but anybody care to comment on that?
I could talk a little bit about it. This past week, I did have 4 librarians in the library and the rest of them all working from home. So we experienced somewhat that situation. And I'll tell you, after the first couple of days, it was hard because you're with people you're used to being with, in a place you're used to being, and you want to have lunch together. You want to do the things that you did before. It was hard to constantly remind yourself that you couldn't just walk that close to somebody, hand that thing to that person, that you had to be thinking about it all the time. I think that we're going to run into problems. I think shortly after people are back into their routines, it's going to be hard to keep people from getting back into their old habits.
Thanks, Kim. Anybody else?
I can, Caitlin again, our main desk is staffed by 2 full-time people and 1 part-time person. And usually under normal hours, we have just enough scheduled so that we overlap by like half an hour. Some of us have a little bit longer with each other than others, but it's that communication is so crucial. Like when the next person comes in, you need that half an hour's worth of, all right, here's the scoop here, X has been done. This needs to be done. This is a situation we're having. That's why all of our desks are so close together. We rely on that communication for each other. And so to have to, in the face of possibly having to like schedule where one person is literally walking out the door and the other person is walking in the door, I am concerned about that communication, not about a lack of communication happening. And I'm not exactly sure how to tackle that one. There's only so many Post-it notes you can leave.
Do Post-its stand up to bleach? Do we know that? Anybody else on employee working conditions? I mean, the thing that also comes to mind is what Brahma was talking about when, in terms of really anybody we're working with, whether it's we're used to working side by side on a reference question or a computer question, it's going to be awkward to pull out the laser pointer. I went and grabbed this. If you use 2 of these library sticks, it's about, these are for newspapers, that's about 6 feet. So you could, if you tape 2 of these together, you could help somebody with a reference question. But does anybody have any comment about sort of the emotional toll of distancing in all types of ways with different people at work?
One of the other things we have to figure out is we have a part-time acquisitions cataloger librarian who's 74. And she just came back to work this week, a couple of days a week. She's been staying home. And a lot of what she does, she has to have the physical material, books we buy with her to catalog them and to deal with them. And we're thinking, do we have her work at home and drop off boxes to her house for her to process? Do we move all the LC schedules to her house and to just send her computer home with her until next year sometime? And then when stuff is ready, pick it up. I mean, she wants to keep coming to work, and we're sort of on defense about should she be back here when students are, we just finish exams and classes. So the campus is pretty empty until July. But in the fall, we'll have 60 people back on campus. And most of them live here. And a lot of them have kids who are in the schools and everything else every day. I'm not sure we really should have a 74-year-old staff member working here until next year sometime.
We've seen we've seen some entries in chat talking about staff culture and just generally library culture, limits to how many people can be in the break room at a particular time, and how that may be impactful or will probably be impactful. Ellen from Western Tech made an interesting comment about, she says, I'm concerned about how all the changes, rules, and restrictions will change the helpful atmosphere and culture that we've worked so hard to build. My fear is that opening is actually going to be a step backwards in the work we've been doing in building that atmosphere in the library. And I think that's probably true for a lot of folks too. It's what you project to your students, faculty, and staff culturally, I think is going to be harder to do if everyone has to wear a mask and everyone has to stay 6 feet away from each other. That might be tough to be the library that you want to be, and to be the library staff that you're so used to being for your patrons.
I think another cultural thing that may have to change is that, like a lot of other librarians, I would drag myself in when I was sick. I'd have a bad cold and I would still come in because I was needed. And we may have to rethink some of that culture too, that if we're sniffling and coughing, we should not be at work. We can work virtually and remotely. But that will also be a change in mindset from the way many of us are so service oriented that we neglect our own health to help others.
I think that's a really good point, Catherine, and I think that's true both in the library world, but generally, something that we should try to remember is that taking care of yourself actually is a way that you can take care of other people too. And that's practically true in a situation like this, but that might be true just generally in our lives. Thinking about how you treat yourself can actually improve what you're able to do for other people around you.
Yeah, Ellen's message is a heartbreaker to read because I think it hits home with all of us. I was also thinking this morning that, I mean, beyond rule changes and stuff, we kind of have, I think we have to work a little bit. And I think if we communicate it well, we'll probably be okay if we can communicate to students that, whether it's with reserves or checkouts or computer help or whatever, that the pace of our service might be slower. You know, we may have to take breaks for hand washing or hand sanitizing. And again, if we can communicate that it's for it's in everyone's interest that we do that. And this is why we're more slow and more careful. I think it'll work okay. There may be some guilt and some resistance to that, but I think that's sort of what we're going to have to adopt in the short term.
I also think that those of us in Wisconsin are fairly blessed. I don't know if anyone in Milwaukee feels differently, but some of my relatives were physicians working in New York City. And for some communities, there is a huge sense of grief right now because it's sort of like what I've heard of during the AIDS crisis in the 80s when large populations were sick and dying. And if we get that second wave, if it ever gets as bad in Wisconsin as it did in Manhattan, then we may also be having grieving students and employees, which we have to be prepared for.
I think an interesting point came up in chat that a library can be online only and still provide excellent service, and that the virtual library can be a friendly and service-oriented place too. And I think that's true, although there's also a follow-up that not every patron will be able to access the virtual library due to their own budgetary and technological limitations. So it's a very weird time, a very weird place to be, where you want to provide the best possible service that you can, knowing that not everyone will be able to take advantage of it.
Okay, so some people have participated by addressing questions. Does anybody want to pose a question about something they're wondering about?
Or if you've got something really cool and innovative that you've come up with at your library that you want to share with the group, now would be a great time for that too.
Just since this is a Wills group, maybe we can leverage the buying power of Wills as we all have budget cuts, that we can maybe get together on more group purchases for things like library help or lib shares, or maybe we can leverage the power of Wills to get better deals for all of us.
That's definitely the theory, and we're, you know, I don't want to take this time to pitch products by any means, but some of the things that have been talked about both verbally and in chat are things that there are Wills groups for. There's good Wills pricing on some of, you know, virtual library chat, virtual resources that might be helpful, and we're always open to pushing for, always trying to push for the best possible deal we can for our members on anything you need, whether that's a content database or a tool like a chat service.
Thanks, Catherine. Anybody else have I'm wondering about, or here's an idea I had that I'd like to share? Pete said we're all shy. Thank you, Pete. Let me think. Melissa, I know you sent me a couple of things that you wanted me to ask. And there was one thing related to what Jeff was talking about is where can we support each other? So beyond things like purchasing, is there any other way that we can support each other as we reopen or begin to think about reopening?
And as a follow-up to that, and probably as I speak, my dog is going to start barking, so I apologize. But my question when I was listening to some folks speaking and writing in chat is some of the policies and procedures that you're developing. How are you documenting those, and are there places that you're sharing them amongst each other so folks don't have to reinvent ideas?
I know for us, we really haven't got to the policy thing. We've just got through finals, and we're coming up with a whole bunch of workshops in the short term. So, and I don't think, just like someone else said, I forgot who, we probably won't be on campus till August again. So we really haven't got to talk about policies.
Well, one thing I would encourage is to reach out to your colleagues at other institutions. Something I always note about Wisconsin's academic library landscape is that naturally we're siloed to some extent. I mean, there are ready-made groups that exist. So, the UW, all the various UWs have some ready-made connections already there. So there's resources there. I think to some extent that's true of the technical college system libraries too. But there are informal connections as well. Our private colleges have, an association that they're members of. But think of the ways that you might be able to reach across those lines as well. If at the UW some interesting idea or some process has come out, think about how you might be able to share that out to people or libraries that aren't part of that group. Now more than ever, I think is a time for us to be thinking about how to reach across those lines, at least with ideas or our thoughts or help, even if we can't physically go to these other places. I think it's always been important, but I don't think it's ever been more important now that we think less about the things that make our libraries different or separate us, and more about what we can be doing with and for each other.
I think another question I would ask is, if people felt like this was helpful, would you want Wills to host another meeting similar to this one as we get maybe some of us more closer to opening? Kim says yes, but I'm going to say that since there are.
You're muted.
You muted yourself.
Sorry,
Big Matt.
I was just saying Kim had said that she's open to a meeting, but I was going to reach out to her anyway because she's already done things like collected materials and so forth.
I'd say in chat, it looks like a lot of yeses rolling into the chat window. So I feel confident that you can expect to have at least one more of these conversations as the summer progresses. Maybe more than that if it feels like there's a demand for it.
And
We're
whoever
happy to
spoke,
do it.
yeah, and whoever spoke the least is the next moderator. That's what we decided.
Yeah, you know, Matt hit on one of the golden rules at Wills. He piped up. He said, "Hey, is this something that Wills might be interested to do?" And we said, "That's a great idea. You're the moderator now." So that's keep that in mind too. I don't ever want to discourage anyone from speaking up, but you know, people that if you show up, then that shows us that you're interested and enthusiastic. So I'm sure we'll do something else again.
I don't know
Hey,
if
one-
anyone is on today that has a state leadership role, but I know that we would just like to know what best practices are for the whole state, because there's really been, there hasn't been that much information. We all read the CDC guidelines, but there just isn't a lot out there.
Well, the state government says everything should just be back to normal and don't worry about anything. So I'm not sure we want to follow that leadership.
I know from the public library side of things, DPI is working on crafting some guidance at this point, and I think that they hope to have something out next week. I don't want to make anything up, but that's from a state perspective and could be helpful in some ways as well. So we can try to stay on top of that and share out anything we see that would be interesting and helpful.
Hey, one logistical question, Jeff, is in the recording, will we have access to all the group chat so we could, because I didn't have a chance to read that as I was trying to listen.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, and I think so. Melissa, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but we're recording, of course, the video and voice. I think that there's another file that Zoom generates that has kind of a transcript of the group chat as well. We'll look at that. I think we'll figure out what the best possible way to share it, because I'm seeing all kinds of cool links in the group chat as well. I think it might be valuable and not a huge amount of work for somebody to just harvest those links and put them all in one place as well, in addition to sharing the transcript of the chat. So we'll dig into that a little bit, maybe this afternoon or early next week, to make sure that we're sharing out both the recording of the session. I'll publish a link to this recording in all the same places that we announced that today's meeting was happening. Feel free to share that as you did the announcement, and then we'll figure out how to share out the chat, whether that comes in the same package. I'm not totally sure what that'll look like, but we'll figure out how to do that too.
Well, thank you, Jeff and Melissa. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great idea. It's 12:01. We filled an hour. That's great. So I guess we're at the point of saying thank you to everybody for participating. I think it was a great conversation. Do keep an eye out for the follow-up with, like I just described, the recording and chat transcript and so forth. And I guess in the longer term, keep an eye out for some future meeting or meetings to follow up and see how things have progressed and what new things people have come up with as we make our way through summer. Thanks all for coming, and have a good lunch and hopefully stay healthy. Have a good holiday weekend, and we'll all talk again real soon.
Enjoy the long weekend. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for organizing this. Bye.